Hey guys, Joe with Bitraged. So it's October 31st. I want to do a quick update here on Bitcoin. It's been interesting and we've been getting a lot of questions about it. And frankly, what is going on right now, you're not seeing a lot of activity from traders, right? So most of the activity you see on Bitcoin right now is bot trading, even wash trading, that sort of thing. There's not a ton of good setups either way at the current point, and we'll demonstrate that here in a minute. But if you just look at the weekly chart here, you can see since really the beginning of September, it's been just one big corrective move. And towards the end of it here, the last couple weeks, it's been extremely corrective. And the reason for that is participation in the market is at ridiculous low. I've read a tweet here this week, I believe it was yesterday, where somebody said, well, Bitcoin's less volatile than the Dow and the S&P and that kind of thing right now. And it is. But the reason it's less volatile than, the stock market right now is, one, the stock market is going through a very unique time where there is a bigger correction happening. But also, volume levels are mediocre. So when you have participation in the market, it's a low for the year. That's going to contribute to, stagnant movement and really corrective movement. And so it will be stable. But you have to ask yourself the question, well, why is it stable? Is it stable because, it's just found this trading range? Or is it stable simply because there's not the participation in the market? And right now, there's just not the participation in the market. But either way, I wanted to look at it here for you guys. If you look at the structure, it hasn't changed a ton. I am looking at, this trend line here and then this structure here. And the reason I'm looking at that is you can see what we had. We had a move down. This move here, even though it's just been characterized by little momentum and very corrective movement, it's looking more like just a continuation to move down. So if it is that, then it is possible here to come down to this area, move back up, and then sell. So natural progression, it would not be uncommon to see that, bounce up and then sell just based on the structure here. But also you have to consider that, there's just no participation in this area. All right, so here's what we have. We had this big spike, and that was simply very likely wash trading. And just looking at it, and then what happened afterwards, very likely wash trading. Then you had this period here where it's just been really, really, really corrective. So during this period here, I'm not trading. I'm not even looking at trading this. The reason being is when you have volume levels that low, it just doesn't make sense, because even if you call the move correctly, it can be very hard to get orders filled. It can be very hard to, get stop orders filled and, even take profit. It's very hard to get any orders filled. And so it's one of those situations where it really just doesn't make sense to jump in on any trades at the current time. You can see we had some sell-off here, and I think we're just in this corrective time period. So this structure here, it's looking more like a flag. We have the move down. You would expect this to complete at least to here. I'm not really looking to trade that. The reason being is, as we saw here, we could just kind of just move like this for a long period of time just because participation is so low in the market. So what am I looking at ultimately? So if we zoom out here, I think it's very, very likely that we'll break this area here. If we break that and then start to get this kind of structure, I'd be much more prone to take this setup than this setup. Why? The reason being is if we break, even below the low, this would be right on the low, so we can put a line in here. But if we break through the low for the year, I think it's very likely we'll start to see participation in the market pick up, even if that is more of a selling situation. But you're likely to see participation pick up, volume pick up. That will help you, get orders filled and really get the liquidity you need to effectively trade this market. And so if we get this kind of structure, I'd be much more likely to jump in on this setup than this setup. This setup here would be much more reliable than a setup here or even here, because we're still in that corrective phase. But if we break and we see some momentum to the downside, then a flag type pattern, I'd be much more apt to jump in on that. It's going to be much more higher probability. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. I think it's still very, very likely that this ultimately breaks this low here and probably completes down to about 4,800, but at least breaks the low, and then we'll reassess it once it does get there. And I'll be honest, Bitcoin hasn't been a huge focus of late simply because of the corrective movement and really the lack of volume. It just doesn't make sense to jump in on this when there's better opportunities out there. And so that's kind of been the reasoning behind it. We still see 4,800 as a very likely area to complete to. But that said, it could just break the low here of about 5,800 and then rebound. So we have to be aware of that as well. So what I would do here is simply be aware that it's very likely we break this low and then reassess it at that time. But I think right now it's just one big correction. There's not a lot of great setups right now, and when we're in these periods of correction, it can just move like this, and it can just break the trend line and keep going for quite a while before it actually does commit to any move. And that's why these periods can be kind of frustrating, but also it's just one of those periods where you have to learn, okay, this is a time when you need to take your foot off the gas, you need to take a step back and see it for what it is and not jump in on everything. So I did want to talk about this here briefly. We had this move up, but just take a look at this move. We have this huge move up and then the big retrace, and then we have this pattern here. So if you look at it, it's not your typical move up and then flag to move higher. If anything, it's a move up, even if that is wash trading. Move up, it's a retrace, and then this pattern here is a sell setup. So you have retrace, continuation, sell. This would just be another continuation to then sell, probably at least to about 6,000, 6,100, that area. So that's what you would expect to happen. But again, there's really not the greatest levels of liquidity to jump in on any trade. So I'd be aware of that and keep that in mind if you are looking to jump in on it. I'm not, and I'm not going to trade this, and I'm not going to jump in on anything until we get a much clearer structure. Right now we're just in this corrective structure, and it can just move sideways for quite a while before it then does commit. But ultimately, I think it's very likely we'll see Bitcoin down at 4,800, but at the very least we'll break this low. It's very probable we'll break that low at about 5,800, and then we'll reassess it and say, okay, what can we look at now? So that's kind of what we're looking at for Bitcoin. Just very, very corrective, and you have to be cautious of that and know what you're looking at, and just be aware that this can move sideways for a prolonged period of time before it then does commit to the sell. So that's what we're looking at. Hopefully that helps you, clarifies kind of what we're looking at for Bitcoin, and gives you an idea of how you can play it if you're looking to. Appreciate you watching the video. Take care now, guys.